In this next section, I'm going to talk about deploying on Kubernetes. I'm going to use Spinnaker to deploy our application on a running Kubernetes cluster. So first I will explain you what Kubernetes is and what the advantages are. Then I will show you the installation, and then we're going to build a pipeline that will deploy on Kubernetes. First, what is Kubernetes? And if you already followed one of my Kubernetes courses, then you can skip this first lecture and you can go straight to the next one. Also, if you don't know at all what Kubernetes is, then it might be useful for you to follow one of my Kubernetes courses, which will go in detail how Kubernetes works. So what is Kubernetes? Kubernetes is an open source orchestration system for Docker containers. It lets you schedule containers on a cluster of machines. You can run multiple containers on one machine. And you can have multiple machines, so you can have multiple containers running over multiple machines, and that we call the Kubernetes cluster. You can run long-running services like web applications, those are always running, or you can schedule cron job-like jobs. You can schedule jobs that will just do a one-off, like a batch job that runs in the middle of the night. Kubernetes will then manage the state of these containers. You can actually just run Docker containers on any machine, but then they will not be managed. Kubernetes is software that will manage the state of these containers. It will orchestrate your containers. It can start the containers on specific nodes. So you will just say, here Kubernetes, schedule this application, which will start containers on specific nodes. Does the node fail? Kubernetes will make sure that it gets rescheduled. So it will restart a container when it gets killed, when the node goes down, when the health checks on the container fail. Kubernetes will do that all for you. If you don't have Kubernetes and you just run a container, then if the container stops, it just stops. You would have to write your own orchestration around that. It can also move containers from one node to another, and it can attach volumes to pods and reattach them when they move to other nodes. So pods is a term used in Kubernetes, which is where the containers run in. So you have a pod, and a pod can run on a node, and if the pod fails, it will run on another node. But a pod can also have a volume where you can keep state, where you can keep data. And those volumes can even be reattached, depending on what kind of volumes you're using. You can use, for instance, Amazon's EBS, which is elastic storage. You can attach it to a pod, and when the pod fails, when the node fails, Kubernetes can reattach that volume to another node, and then it can schedule your pod on that other node. So it can do a lot of stuff for you that you don't get if you just run a Docker container on a single node. Instead of just running a few Docker containers on one host manually, Kubernetes is a platform that will manage the containers for you. So that's what I said. Kubernetes clusters can start with one node and grow to thousands of nodes. You always need a master node, but then you can have one worker node, and then you can grow to thousands of nodes. So it scales horizontally. Some other popular Docker orchestrator exists and are Docker Swarm, which comes with Docker by default. In the latest Docker version, you will also have a built-in Kubernetes next to Swarm. That's also interesting to know. You have DCOS, which is also supported by Spinnaker. So DCOS is an alternative orchestrator for Docker, and you can also use that one. And you also have HashiCorp Nomad, which is also an alternative. Nowadays, they say that Kubernetes won the orchestration wars, and Kubernetes is the most popular one. So that's why we are going to cover Kubernetes. If you're going to schedule Docker containers, then I think Kubernetes is the most obvious choice if you want platform independence. If you go for a specific cloud provider, then there are other alternatives as well, which we will discuss later. But as a platform independent orchestrator, Kubernetes is really great. You can run the official version of Kubernetes or a tested distribution. Some examples of tested distributions are Ranger. So it's basically just repackaged Kubernetes with some extra features.
OpenShift, which is from Red Hat. It's more PaaS-like, which provides you a platform as a service with Kubernetes in the backend. And you also have Tectonic, which is also a distribution of Kubernetes. I think those three are the main ones, the most popular ones, but there are much, much more distributions that you could use and that maybe in the future might become popular. You can also use the cloud versions where the master is maintained by the cloud provider. So you either can run Kubernetes completely yourself, or you can go for a cloud provider and then the cloud provider will maintain part of your Kubernetes distribution, which is more hands-off and might even be more stable if you don't have a team to maintain Kubernetes. Google Kubernetes engine is probably the oldest one that exists. It's just a service that Google offers. You just spin up the cluster, you just own the worker nodes, and you can just push your containers to it. Google will then maintain the master for you, the master or the masters. Amazon EKS, which is still in preview, Q1 2018, but is expected to become general available at some point. It's the hosted Kubernetes version of Amazon. And then you have Azure AKS, same story there, will become general available at some point, also the hosted version. You can really run Kubernetes anywhere you want, on-premise, in your own data center, or on the public cloud, using the software that I described, or even building it yourself. So you can do it on Google Cloud, AWS, Azure, DigitalOcean, anywhere you can spin up a VM. Or you can go hybrid. You can say, I want to use both public and on-prem private cloud. It's highly modular, so you can pick and choose what you want. It's open source. There's a great community around Kubernetes, and Kubernetes is a cloud-native computing foundation project and maintained by Google, Red Hat, CoreOS, and others. And Red Hat also did an acquisition of CoreOS, so Red Hat and CoreOS are now the same company, which proves that Red Hat also thinks that containerization is the future and they needed to expand it, so they bought CoreOS to keep on expanding on their container offerings.